Welcome to the Too Long Didn't Read Book Club, where we give you the best bits of the best books and leave you, hopefully, wanting more. Be sure to smash that like button, click subscribe, and the notification bell, all that good stuff, so that you know when we put out new videos, because we're going to be putting out quite a few and you don't want to miss a single one of them. In December of 2001, a few months after the 9/11 attacks, U.S. intelligence had pinpointed Osama bin Laden's location to one of the world's most formidable strongholds, the mountains of Tora Bora. The mountains of Tora Bora, which lie in the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, are some of the steepest, most unforgiving on the planet. Within these mountains were thousands upon thousands of al-Qaeda fighters ensconced deep within hundreds of miles of concrete bunkers and supply tunnels. They had heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, improvised explosives, mortars, and rations to last many, many months without resupply. These were seasoned warfighters on their home turf with every motivation to win or die fighting. On a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of difficulty, this was a 10 for any opposing force. Few, if any, organizations in the world were equipped with the personnel, the equipment, the skill set, and the logistical capabilities that it would take to even hope of surviving in the freezing, pine-covered, and granite-laden peaks in a land seemingly a million miles from anywhere. This is where the author, pen name Dalton Fury, and the squadron under his command, comprised of a few dozen operators, come into play. These men made up one cog in a very small, very secretive, but unprecedentedly effective group whose existence to this very day is still denied by the United States Army and the Department of Defense. Many had been in the military for over a decade, and all had been through years of selections to even gain an opportunity to try out for a spot amongst what was considered to be an organization that had few, if any, peers. After a selection process that is still kept a relative secret, but is known to involve rucking around 40 miles with around 50 pounds, there is a 90% and up attrition rate, with some selection classes graduating only one man onto the next round of training. After a year of training in high-level combat skills, they are selected for what at the time, in 2001, was one of three squadrons. So after your initial year of training and tryouts, you're selected for A Squadron, B Squadron, or C Squadron. These squadrons and their support personnel comprise what is known to be possibly the most elite military organization in history. Officially, it has gone by a number of names, from SOFD-1, Special Forces Operational Detachment 1, to Combat Applications Group, to a number of other monikers. Most who are familiar with it and desire to retain some air of discretion refer to it simply as the unit. Most other people in the world know it as Delta Force. In 2001, Dalton Fury was the officer in charge of A Squadron and was in charge of leading his men to find the single most wanted man, maybe in history. And this book, honestly, regardless of your opinion from a socio-political perspective, is not only a tribute to the men and mission it is about, but to the truly unique and ultimately very humbling life of its author, Dalton Fury. The entire book is written with meticulous attention to detail, unerring honesty from a boots-on-the-ground perspective, and a genuine intent that I think will be palpable to any reader to honor the men and organization that he served with. Fury details his early days as a child, growing up as an army brat in Germany, then in the American South. He admired his dad's service in the army, but had no real concept of what he did, nor any desire to emulate his dad himself. However, after deciding college was not for him, and seeing a particularly enthralling magazine cover with Special Forces legend Bo Grizz recounting his attempt to rescue hostages in the 1970s, he became more intrigued. This, combined with a persuasive recruiting pamphlet from the Army's Ranger Regiment, the premier light infantry force in the world, eventually drew the young Fury into the same service that his father and ultimately twin brother would serve in. In the midst of a Ranger training exercise, Fury recalls sitting in a plane on an Army-based tarmac, squeezed in with other fully kitted-out Rangers, when a large Chevy Suburban rolled up, and out popped several men with mustaches, long hair, and pearl-snap shirts. They collected duffel bags from the back, tossed them onto the plane, and grabbed themselves seats. This was Fury's first exposure to Delta, and he decided that he would have to try out. After 12 years in the Rangers, Fury attended and passed a legendary selection and was assigned to A Squadron. Here he would be in command of a cast of guys that really make this story what it is. To name a few, there's Shrek, the heavily bearded, built like a brick shithouse former Ranger and Green Beret, who would ultimately complete the first solo mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. All by himself, just took his gun and him on a van, like driving through checkpoints and stuff. Just one part of this book. It's insane. There's Hopper, the longtime operator and former Army Ranger, an unflappable team leader, and unrivaled forward thinker. These guys are really the world's best problem solvers, and a world's best like under duress planning and problem solvers. The things that they're able to do in this book, as far as quickly shifting their mindset and logistical capabilities in order to address something that, and a lot of times it's just minor stuff, but they're able to fix things quickly and creatively, and they are, it's quite the enviable, admirable skill set. There's Ski, the former Green Beret, who's basically like the tech guy in this. He's kind of connected to everybody. He's got shaggy hair and a beard and an omnipresent Marlboro cigarette that just like Fury always talks about it like dangling from his lips. It's always part of his demeanor. There's Jester and Dugan, former Rangers turned Delta snipers whose hobbies included bodybuilding and big game tracking. The Admiral, perhaps the man who would leave Tora Bora with the biggest kill count as the squadron's combat controller, a little-known and highly specialized job that Delta outsources from the Air Force's Tier 1 unit, known in 2001 as the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. The Admiral was responsible for controlling the airspace above Tora Bora, him and another combat controller, and as such would call in bomb strikes the likes of which had not been seen since the Vietnam War. There's Skeeter and Rip, two newly minted operators for whom this would be their first mission with the unit, both of whom who have now gone on as legendary operators in their own rights. They met the team on the tarmac in the Bagram Air Base. There's Durango, the medic and trained sniper who would conduct not only offensive combat but high-level tactical medicine under duress and in environs seldom seen by even the most elite. And, perhaps the most revered man by all mentioned in the book, Command Sergeant Major Ironhead. In a very insular world known for some of the most professional, driven, and hard-working people on the planet, Ironhead still stood out from the rest. He was a former longtime Ranger, and by this time had accrued more than a decade worth of time with the unit. Fury recalls Ironhead, who would later conduct a one-man marathon resupply trip under heavy enemy fire, training his mind and body by running hills at the unit compound in a full gas mask and full body armor, just going over the hill to the next shooting range, shooting there, coming back, just all day long, back and forth, running places, full body armor and gas mask. So, on to the battle. The unit arrives in Afghanistan on a plane that has to unload all their gear and then retrofit a bevy of Toyota Hiluxes with foam mattresses and water cans to piss in so they can make the roughly 10-hour trip to the base of the Tora Bora Mountains, all conducted at a snail's pace through active minefields and dressed as local fighters to throw off the growing Western media presence and the locals. So they're kind of fighting this like double-edged battle the entire time, keeping themselves secret from all of the mainstream Western media that was showing up to document what was happening, and from the locals who aren't quite sure who they are, other than heavily bearded and heavily armed foreigners. After arriving at the base of the mountains, a dilapidated former schoolhouse that had been cleared of literal loads of human feces to be made suitable for the operation base, the guys met up with their allies, the Mujahideen. So after they personally cleared all this old schoolhouse out of human shit, they have to go meet with the local fighters whose motives are dubious at best. Being that their alliance was more one of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, the Americans would remain rather dubious of the Muj commitment throughout, for good reason, as we'll come to see. But Upon securing some Mujahideen fighters to guide them into the mountains and obtaining the approval of the local warlord, the Delta guys are kitted up and head into the seemingly insurmountable mountain stronghold to find the proverbial needle in the haystack. Or really, in this case, it's more like a needle in a hornet's nest that was Osama bin Laden. Over the course of the next several days, they would cover dozens, maybe even hundreds of miles, kill thousands of enemy fighters, and drop more ordnance than had been seen anywhere on the planet in the last 50 years. These snipers and combat controllers would at one point be stuck deep behind enemy lines, several times having to scramble over cliffs to avoid enemy patrols. As mentioned before, when supplies ran low, Ironhead, Command Sergeant Major Ironhead, this guy is just a fucking legend, right? It's crazy. Made a one-man, multiple-trip, miles-long resupply trip to restock the men with food and ammunition. All the while, it is freezing. Most of the men lost anywhere from 10 to 20, even 30 pounds, and there was not a wink of sleep to be had. And while all of this is going on, Fury must keep a watchful eye on the local warlord, alternately kind of admonishing him and encouraging him, navigating not only the literal mines of the area, but continually sidestepping landmines that arise one after the other, as the Mujahideen often prove more of a hindrance than a help by giving up ground that they gained during the day just to go home and sleep at night. This baffled every American present, and eventually several British kind of reinforcements that would show up. Basically, they call the Special Boat Service, they're SEAL Team 6, basically. But Fury's narration does a superb job in illustrating the fact that this fight was just as important as the one raging on the front lines a few miles away. It is a razor's edge to walk, with many lives on the line, and Fury and company managed it masterfully with little to no specific preparation or training beforehand on how to actually do any of this. So, after a week of constant onslaughts of bombs, mortars, bullets, and everything else, they had like flaming barrels thrown down the mountain at them at one point. The contingent of Delta operators had made it to within roughly a kilometer. It's inside maybe like 3/4 of a mile, half a mile or so, a little over half a mile from bin Laden's location in the caves in Tora Bora. They could hear him on the radio telling his fighters to either give up honorably or to flee into the mountains through Pakistan. And they wanted to call in the 10th Mountain Division and the 82nd Airborne to seal off those exits into Pakistan. They had intercepted the radio traffic, knew exactly where he was, and they wanted to go in and strike the coup de grace. However, inexplicably, the men are told to stand down. Imagine what this would have meant in 2001 to have captured or killed the alleged mastermind behind the September 11th attacks. The decades, dollars, and lives that could have been saved had this been accomplished. But, despite the operators' vehement protestation and disgust, they were called off. No reason has ever been given as to why, and it certainly makes one think. Fury and his squadron would go on to serve years more with honor and distinction, racking up medals and commendations that are too long to be consolidated here. Dalton Fury would eventually retire and go on to pen a series of extraordinary action novels based on his time with the unit, following the fictional Colt Rainer, in what may be summed up best as an action-faction literature series, and I personally highly recommend him as an incredibly loquacious and introspective writer. Sadly, Dalton Fury, whose real name was Thomas Greer, and we only disclose that real name here because it's been disclosed elsewhere, and to hopefully promote him as an author and people to understand his story, and so that if you are so inclined, you can look him up in the United States Army Ranger Hall of Fame as Thomas Greer. He passed away from prostate cancer in 2016. He was a truly talented, devoted, and honorable man, and he left behind a wife and 2 daughters, and I have always held him in high regard as both an inspiration and an example since reading this book. So I highly encourage you to go check out not only this book of his, but his others as well. Also, if you know where to look, you can find just about all the operators mentioned above on social media nowadays. Most are still either teaching shooting in some capacity, or have gone on to a plethora of other entrepreneurial and high achieving endeavors. Many have gone on to philanthropic efforts, and some have become successful entrepreneurs. Skeeter is actually nowadays a top-notch pro bass fisherman. Talented dude. So, if you want an unequaled inside look into not only perhaps the most preeminent battle of the early 20th century, but a look into the darkest corners of the U.S. military's elite, and ultimately an outstanding field manual on how to lead human beings in extreme situations, this book is for you. I give it an official TLDR Book Club 5 out of 5 stars. Don't miss this one. Link to purchase in the description below. So, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the TLDR Book Club. If you want more on this subject, be sure to check out the podcast where we'll do an in-depth kind of what would we call it? Recap. Yes, that's what I'm looking for. Got to the end here and just kind of ran out of words. But we'll do an in-depth recap and a longer form and examination of the entire subject here in more of a kind of a conversation format. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Be sure to check out All Damn Night Network at alldamnnight.com. Stories to stay up to. You don't want to miss it. That's where everything you want is. alldamnnight.com. This is where we're kind of consolidating all of our shows at. And of course, you already know, like button, subscribe, share, smash them all. And don't forget that notification bell. We will see you here next time on the TLDR Book Club.